I'm spoiling you a bit too much. Obviously, we have the Carcano 91 today. Have you seen it? Titled, Welcome, as always, I'm Vlad Shoots History. The Carcano is a bit of the Italian's rifle. It was called the Italian's rifle because it saw wide use in the two world wars. I noticed you there, the story that says that World War I helped make Italy from a mix of pre-unitary states. Because Italy, for the first time, seriously fights a common enemy to all Italians. We could say for this also the Carcano, the rifle of the Italians. A dubious theory, at least, but the fact remains that the Carcano for Italy was a fundamental weapon used for more than 50 years. It represents the Italian war effort and also the Italian technological thought because it's a very interesting weapon. It's a very simple weapon, mechanically, certainly made better in its simplicity than weapons like the Mosin, for example. Because the history, in a certain sense, of the Carcano is analogous. I'm not saying similar, but it's analogous. Some people don't like the Carcano, particularly in America. It has a bad reputation regarding accuracy, despite the famous Kennedy assassin with the Carcano. It has a bad reputation because of something that I will give you in detail later. What did the Americans do to these rifles? Because this rifle has a very particular barrel, and shortening it can be a problem, but let's go in order, as always. This is the story of the Carcano. I usually start by talking with a brief biography of the character, that is Salvatore Carcano. But I don't want to start like this, because I want to specify something very important. This weapon is known as the Carcano, and Salvatore Carcano had a strong contribution to this weapon. But the truth is that this weapon is the result of a commission like the Mosin, or the Mosin Nagant. In reality, it is very much Mosin. But it's also the work of the commission that was behind it, Mosin, who approved or did not approve. We saw everything in the video about the Carcano, actually the same thing. Abroad, it is often known as Mannlicher Carcano because, for example, the loading system is actually licensed from Mannlicher, even though it reminds of another design, that of the Gewehr 88. So, first thing, what do we underline? Yes, Carcano, Salvatore Carcano, an extremely important character in some of the features, but the design of the Carcano was in every effect a collective effort, we could say. Some call it Mannlicher Carcano Paravicino. There's quite a bit of history behind this thing. Anyway, Salvatore Carcano, born in Bobbiate in the province of Varese, was orphaned at the age of 10. This forced him to leave his studies and start working. As a young man, he fought in the War of 48 in reality as a soldier in the artillery. From the beginning of his career, he was actually sent to work in the arsenals. Because he was an expert in machinery, he knew how to make machinery. He knew how to repair the machinery that made, for example, weapons or artillery pieces or whatever else. In reality, Carcano's genius in his constant work is not so much perhaps the conception of firearms from scratch. Carcano is a person who knows how to adapt existing designs and produce them efficiently. He is an expert in machines. He has no formal gunsmith training, we could say. He is an engineer who deals with the machinery for the production of these things and knows how to make the production very simple. In the 1860s, Carcano continues his work in the Royal Factory in Turin. In 1867, however, the first of the Carcanos is adopted. The Needle Carcano has a beautiful video about the Needle Carcano that I absolutely put in the description, because go and see it. The fact is that this needle weapon was born as an extremely economical conversion of the existing muskets in the army's inventory, first Piedmontese and then Italian. The price for these conversions was 10 lire, relatively little in this field for the time, and Carcano manages to adapt systems that already partly existed for this project. The urgency of the conversion stemmed from the fact that the previous year, the Prussians, armed with the Dreiser breech-loading rifle, had beaten the Austrians, still armed with muzzle-loading muskets. In fact, Carcano's conversion is partly inspired by the same German Dreiser, combined with another needle rifle, the Dorschbaumgarten, from which it partly takes the safety. Perhaps the most interesting feature of this adaptation made by Carcano is the safety, because the weapon had no safety. However, needle guns have this needle that protrudes. It could hit the primer more than they theoretically do. In modern weapons, he invented a very simple system, without further modifying the weapon's frame, to simplify the production as much as possible. He invented a very rudimentary safety system, the same safety system that we have in the Carca. We don't see it in detail, but the idea is that the spring is contained in a unit, we could say inside the bolt itself. That's what I can do, what I can actually do. With this Carcano and with the 67 Carcano, raise tension to the striker's wheel. I take the trigger and nothing happens. In this way, the needle rifle was made safe because the needle didn't have the strength to go forward. It was a very simple solution, technically speaking, very easy to implement. However, the Carcano rifle is not perfect despite all the conversion, and there are a few examples of successful conversions in history. In the end, it's about readapting weapons. From muzzle loader to breech loader, there's always a technological limit. Italy quite quickly, since it was behind the development curve. Especially for what had happened the previous year at Königgrätz, where the Prussians, armed with breech-loading weapons, mopped the floor with the Austrians armed with Lorentz muzzle loaders. Many nations at that moment went almost into panic. Many adopted breech-loading systems very quickly, some too quickly, some in the sense adopted systems that they would then replace a few years later. I'm reminded of the French chassepot of 66, which was then a few years later, because in 74 it was produced in millions and replaced by the French Gras, also produced in millions. A huge expense. While the idea of the Carcano, the Italians knew that the Carcano 67 was not perfect. In fact, it was clearly, explicitly thought of as an interim solution. We convert these things very quickly because if a war happens, at least we have something. In the meantime, we look for a real breech-loading weapon, the only real use of the needle Carcano, in fact, where the Italian troops clashed with the pontifical troops armed with Remington rolling blocks. A real breech-loading weapon with a metallic cartridge. The commission, which was studying the issue of small arms, decided to choose a new weapon, a real breech-loading weapon. Carcano participates in these selections. For the breech-loading weapon, there is a very rare Carcano, existing only in prototypes, which is the Carcano 1870. Here we are already with the metallic cartridge. These are selections, however, that are notoriously won by the Vetterli 1870. So, in that year, Italy, like practically all European powers, has a modern, for the time, single-shot breech-loading rifle in service. But, as we well know, the technological development of weaponry in those years is extremely fast, and two fundamental technologies are introduced. The first is the loading system, or a magazine, or the repeating firearm capable of firing more than a single shot. And then famously introduced by the French in 1886, the Liebel rifle with smokeless powder. The range of ammunition with smokeless powder, in fact, is drastically superior to any black powder weapon. Italy therefore finds itself, like everyone else, in reality, caught with their pants down technologically. There is a very important thing to consider, however. Italy does not even remotely have the economic resources that nations like France, Germany, Great Britain have. If Italy has to adopt these technologies, it has to do it intelligently. The first smart move it makes is to adapt the existing Vetterli to have a loading system. Will there be more than one actually adopted by the Italians? The most famous, of course, is the Vitali conversion, which gives rise to the Vetterli Vitali 1870 to 87, but we are already in 87. Notice that the smoke powder has already been introduced, and Italy is, so to speak, caught with its pants down, because it has neither smoke powder nor a repeating system. A repeating system is quickly adopted again to have something in case of war, while a new type of smoke ammunition is being developed. Indeed, the Italians are motivated by the fact that their primary enemy, who will remain so during World War I, namely Austria-Hungary, is adopting very modern weapons. In fact, in 1886, they adopt a first repeating Mannlicher, a so-called straight pull, still with black powder, but compressed black powder. They will adopt afterwards, quite quickly, in rapid sequence, the improved 1888 and the 1890. A real smoke powder weapon, properly speaking, to then actually adopt others. Others make many changes. But the sworn enemy of mocking Italy has modern weapons. Italy too must have modern weapons. Thus, a commission is formed in reality which will have to take care of the design and then the production of the new weapon. In 1888, therefore, the commission led by General Paravicino, another of the names often associated with Carcano. They get to work to define what will be the new ammunition and the new weapon. Particularly, Major Artillery Benedetti had pushed very strongly to adopt a bullet with a very tight shot of 6 or 1/4 inch, in addition to the tighter shot and therefore easier. In this way, the number of cartridges issued to soldiers could be increased. Remember that Italy was fresh from the defeat at Adwa, where one of the factors responsible for the defeat, or at least what the Italian army believed at the time, was the fact that the Italians simply ran out of ammunition. So the capacity of the ammunition and how much ammunition a soldier could carry was very important to Italy. The biggest problem, however, was that of stabilizing the ball. In fact, the long ball of the Carcano required a fairly fast rifling that would spin the ball quickly enough. Unfortunately, however, by accelerating this ball in rotation, the rifling inside the barrel was greatly eroded, especially the initial part where the ball was indeed accelerated on its axis. This problem was actually solved with a technical solution well known for many years but really only applied indeed by the Italians in the Carcano. That is the progressive rifling. What does progressive rifling mean? That is, the rifling pitch, or how quickly, so to speak, the bullet is made to rotate. The rifling itself gradually increases. And here I reconnect to what I was telling you about the Americans. The Americans, after the Second World War, often sporterized their weapons to go hunting with them, to make them lighter, and sometimes they would cut the barrels, shorten them. However, this changed the rifling pitch because, being progressive, the bullet was not correctly stabilized, hence the reputation of being inaccurate. Italy does not have many technological resources, I repeat, as much as well, we fought the First World War. Sometimes it seems to us that Italian technology was at the level of those abroad. It was not in many ways. In reality, what is done is to take some foreign design elements to make them in an Italian weapon. Carcano's real role in this context actually involves two things. First, the safety, because the safety is his own equal and equal. Second is the adaptation of this entire system to a simplified production. The loading system is conceived and bought by sworn enemies because literally Italy pays 300,000 lire of the time to buy the Mannlicher system. But it also lays hands on the German Gewehr 88, another weapon created in the panic of the beautiful, another weapon created by a commission, a weapon that is not at all perfect. The Gewehr 88 is not a well-made weapon, but it is a weapon that, with a few adjustments, can be very simple to produce. It's no coincidence that the Gewehr 88 itself is not widely used, but many bolt action mechanically derive from the Gewehr 88, and such are the similarities that it can in some ways be considered. The Carcano is a Gewehr 88, and among other things, the clips that the Carcano uses are very similar. Not so much to those of Mannlicher properly said, but to those of the Gewehr 88, for example, with the fact that they are bidirectional, unlike those of Mannlicher, which are unidirectional. They can only be put in one direction. I'm not loading it because it charges this. These are real ammunition at this moment. The bolt, in many of its elements, reminds of the Gewehr 88, with two front closure lugs. A small extractor that actually hooks the cartridge only when the weapon goes into battery. It's not a so-called control feed, like the well-known one from Mauser, but it allows to save material. In reality, the Carcano has many components that play a double game. For example, the left closure tenon, therefore vertical, when the weapon is closed. In reality, it also acts as a guide for the bolt, when it now slides, so sometimes it can be a bit rubbery. There is also an element attached to a spring, attached to the trigger, that doubles as a trigger spring that keeps the bolt inside. So to remove the bolt, I actually press the trigger and the bolt comes out. But we have an element that doubles, that actually goes to block the other locking tenon. In short, to make a long story short, the Carcano has many simplifications. And where, for example, I criticize the most scene, that the most scene takes a simple weapon concept and overly complicates it. In many ways, the choices made on the Carcano are smart because it's a perhaps complicated weapon that has been simplified in some ways, especially for production. This is the great genius of Carcano, the Carcano. It's not the best bolt action ever produced, it's a medium bolt action among the bolt actions produced, but it's a bolt action really easy to produce. And really the weapon that Italy needed at that time, because it produced millions and could produce millions, despite the technical difficulties. Many of the machines for production were imported from the United States. Initially, some modifications were made during production. Perhaps the most notable modification to the Carcano 91 is that of the extractor. In fact, in the first version, the extractor actually cut a piece of the closing tenon. I'll put up a picture to show you what I mean. while the new extractor, introduced at the beginning of the 20th century, does not weaken the closing tenon. So this is perhaps the biggest difference. Today, specifically, we have, when you see it up close, one of the last of the true 91 products. Because, as you know, the Carcano is in many variants. This is in fact a Carcano 91 of 36, present the last phase of production, before the transition to that mishmash of many variants. The Carcano, which are the 38, the 9138, the 9141. Maybe we'll talk about it another day. But this model, or being post-war, better post-World War I, pre-World War II, is a perfect representative of what the real 91, the 91 was like, along the rifle of the Italians. So let's move the camera, let's go see up close how it's made, how a Carcano rifle works. Then of course we take it for a nice fire test and I tell you what I think and how it ranks. Compared to the other bolt actions that we have previously tried and seen on the channel. We appreciate this Carcano 91 because it is really beautiful, if not for a bit. Here the wood is present, almost perfect. Of course, we are dealing with a rotating and sliding bolt rifle. The bolt, in fact, can be easily operated by raising the cocking handle, pulling it back, moving everything forward and closing the bolt. The safety can be engaged by pushing this element forward, then pulling it back. This will relieve tension on the spring, so the firing pin cannot move forward. With a small note. It's not my favorite safety because, if you remember, I've said many times that the point of the safety is not to prevent human error, it's to prevent something mechanical from causing the firing pin to move forward and strike. A trigger, so a break, a fall, or whatever else. The fact that I'm taking attention away from the spring doesn't prevent the fact that in reality there's nothing standing between the firing pin and the trigger. If not the trigger, in fact, if I press the trigger, as you can see, I can advance the firing pin in a very rare situation where the trigger is pressed for some reason. For example, due to inertia, the bolt, or rather the firing pin, can go forward. For example, when a weapon falls or gets hooked on something, there is the slightest possibility that since the trigger is pressed, this goes forward and strikes the primer. So perhaps, in my opinion, despite the extreme simplicity of the Carcano safety, and we must acknowledge this, it is not the most active safety. We could say that there is a fairly passive safety, which takes into account the fact that there is no tension on the firing pin, but does not isolate the firing system from the bolt itself. We put the weapon back ready to be used in this way, rearming the spring, in addition to the fact that we are struggling with this spring. So it's a much harder system compared to systems like the Moser, for example. We now see them perhaps up close, the production marks. This is marked. Terni is a bit like the home of the Carcano. The Carcano really was born in Terni. We have a very specific graduated sight, very similar to what was already on the Vetterli. We have the battle sights, by pressing this button, sending it forward. We have 328 yards, then going back with the sight, we find 500, 600, 700, 800, and so on, up to the very ambitious distance of 2 kilometers. Obviously, no one had the pretension at that time to shoot with this rifle with the battle sights at 2 kilometers. It's quite an obsolete element, that is the idea that you can somehow shoot in formation by shooting another formation. The officer tells you enemy formation at 0 feet and you shoot in the general direction of the unfortunate ones. Apart from this, the Carcano, even here in front, is quite simple. Unfortunately, we don't have the bayonet today, however we have integrated the Steiner here for the cleaning of the weapon. Let's take a closer look then. How is it made on the inside? We have already mentioned how to remove the bolt, an extremely simple operation. By opening the bolt, we press the trigger and we can thus remove the bolt. As for how the weapon is made, we'll get there also because I have to show you exactly how the loading system is made. We see it a bit better on the firing lines and when we're going to load these clips. But obviously these are N-block clips, so-called 6-shot Mannlicher. They are bidirectional, so I can put them in either this direction or the other direction. It's a characteristic of the Mannlicher clips that they are a fundamental part of the weapon's operation, because the clips have integrated the so-called feeding lips, so without the clip, therefore, the weapon is not able to function at all. We could call this a flaw in the overall system of N-block clips or Mannlicher clips. Let's take a closer look now at the bolt and then go a little deeper inside the weapon. The bolt is actually made up of a few parts. We have a large central body that actually holds everything together. We have it quite evident here. The extractor, which I remind you changed position during production. We have this large hole, which you will ask what it is for. This is a gas vent hole. In the case of the shell breaking, the shell construction technology was a bit worse than it is today, although they still break today. I've seen 2 vitamin weapons explode for this reason, because of a broken shell, so it's rare, but it happened at the time. It could happen more often. It's better that the gases are vented as far away as possible from the shooter. This action, in reality, is also partly done by the safety. The safety is definitely too big. This kind of almost protective disc. Actually, the point of this disc is to protect the shooter's face from the gases as much as possible. In case of a break, we disarm the firing pin as a first step. Then we can go to press this button inside, go to turn this element. Which actually closes the firing pin. From behind we can remove this collar, which in English would be the talking piece. We have here the diagonal part that interacts with the shutter to arm it, as we have seen, and then accompanying. Here, unfortunately, I go out of frame to do this thing, but what I simply do is disarm the safety, which separates me. All the parts, as you can see, we have seen the Carcano's shutter. In reality, it is simple, because the body is very simple, the elements that constitute the percussion elements. We also have a gigantic striker, among other things. Be careful to reassemble it, because there is a specific part. It must go in a specific direction. This striker. We have the safety that, I repeat, does nothing else. Because this spring acts on this safety. Moving this element, I go to compress or release the spring. It's very simple because literally it's a tube, guys. It's a tube with a protrusion. To be able to operate it, therefore, in reality, a nearly rudimentary system. Then we have the English, the cocking piece with the surfaces to rearm this same striker. And obviously, we have the surface that then goes to engage on the trigger tooth. And simply what can be defined as a screw, a bolt that closes. All the system, this might not be the most advanced system in the history of firearms, but a simple system. Because producing these things for Italy, of the time, Italy before the First World War, is very simple. It's simpler than producing many other types of weapons. It's simpler than doing milling, for example, for a Mauser actuator. And notice one thing, the Carcano gets these. It succeeds, we could say in a sense, in doing this thing. Because what comes out is much less complicated than, for example, the Mosin. The other weapon of the Commission is made by putting ideas together. Only here the Commission and Salvatore Carcano, certainly his charisma, have made sure that everything comes out. In a way, let's call it consistent together. The Carcano system does not cover up holes of some defects. Something that Motion Co does, for example, with its famous switch in the charger. No! The Italians also had the intelligence, however, to adopt a cartridge without the collar, thus saving themselves in many, many problems of this type. Let's put the parts of the shutter aside for a moment. We don't lose them, because I want to show you the firing mechanisms of the weapon for a moment, because even here they hide a certain intelligence. To remove the woods from the weapon. First of all, we can press this button and remove this upper piece of wood that doesn't come out. However, we can remove the lower one in this way. Now we need to get help from the tools. This, of course, is a disassembly that the average soldier would not do in the field. We can go ahead and remove the screws that hold the entire mechanism together with the wood. Okay, the longer screw goes in the back, the shorter screw in the front. Even if gently placed, why do we want to be able to shoot with this weapon? I forgot some screws. No, in front, rightly so. The last screw to unscrew is in front of us. How much I love disassembling weapons, beautiful Madonna. You might as well not shoot us. Exactly. And I also moved the cleaning rod. And now I finally can. I am wrong. Yes, as long as it moves, as long as it comes out, we have part of the firing system, or rather the magazine itself. We have the weapon's wood, as you can see. Also here a unique piece, well crafted. We have the manly magazine, which, as you can see, is powered by a fairly strong spring that acts on the bullets. The only other spring actually present in the weapon's mechanics. There are a couple more, but it's this spring that actually holds the clip inside. We need this spring to release the clips, if we wanted to do so. It's just a small element that hooks onto this tooth. If I press it, by pressing it, the clip can come out. As you can see, it's actually a fairly simple system. I want to show you the trigger system, because it also hides quite a few things. This is the firing system. How do you see the trigger? And many things happen around the trigger, because there are three, as you can see, elements that somehow move when you press the trigger. And the smart thing about the Carcano is that it's all driven by this spring here, this spring here, which gives strength to all three elements. What do we have? On the back, there's the sear, or that part. This is the piece that gives the striker the armament that can fit in here. When I press the trigger, the spring pushes it forward. As you see, again, this is hooked to the sear. I press the trigger and it can go forward. This is the other element that you don't see very well, but it's here, inside here, this one that moves. Obviously, it's what actually holds the shutter inside. At the end of the run, in reality, it hits one of the closing tenons, otherwise we won't really see it. We insert the body of the shutter. The shutter doesn't want to go back. If I press the trigger, it goes beyond the other element, an element that is almost always on. In reality, when the shutter slides, it depresses it, because as you can see, I can depress it. Inside, it's nothing more than the weapon's ejector. The weapon's ejector that slides, as you can see, is a channel that gradually releases this ejector, which then pops out and throws out the used cartridge. One of the reasons, perhaps why the Carcano scratches for some, the bolt isn't very smooth because this element, pushed by its spring, constantly causes friction on the bolt. So the imperfect element, we could say in a certain sense, but it simplifies the milling operations on the bolt. Because I don't have to weaken it with a full-length channel, actually simplifies things. Let's have a nice overall view and just as the sun rises in Brony, here's a beautiful overview of everything, as much as the Carcano system completely disassembled. Obviously, we're going to do the universe process to reassemble it. Obviously, we will first reassemble the body of the weapon and then the bolt. So I put it aside for a moment, even here, so I don't lose the right pieces. So we're going to put the barrel and the castle of the weapon inside its wood. And on the other side, we're going to put the mechanism here of the magazine. We can then go on to apply the screws. The long one here in front to hold it all together. Okay, it has taken the short one in front. Okay. Okay, let's put the wood back in front here. Okay, perfect. We have this too. We have done, we can also screw back what we can define. Don't miss the bayonet attack. We are here. I'm putting it in reverse. No, yes, fantastic. Here too we can insert its relative screw. Okay, perfect. We have reassembled the gunshot. Ah, I forgot. The cleaning rod, we can also put it back inside. Okay, now we reassemble the bolt. All its parts. So striker inside spring. Obviously then we have to put the safety here. Wait, there's a specific direction. So where's the specific direction? Here it is. This is the specific direction in which I have to put the spring. It seems like I've made it. Here is the piece that arms everything. Here, see the firing pin. It needs to be turned now in the right direction, because otherwise this won't go in. Because it has its own quite specific milling square, and I turned it from the wrong side. Great, great. Okay. Everything seems to be correct at the moment. Let's screw it back. Manually rearm the striker. Yes, success. I've reassembled it. Wait for the final test. Let's put it in the weapon. I've reassembled a weapon. I put the thing inside. Damn, the car. He shouldn't talk to me. I'm happy. Okay, safe. Everything seems to work. It seems to work very well. Now we can go and do a nice fire test. Now that we've seen how it works in detail, I'll show you all the clips too. The operation, the feelings. Let's go. Here we are at the Brony Range at the Red Bear to try this Carcano. Let's immediately fire the first shots to get a feel for the weapon. I am obviously right-handed, and of course we will also cover the other side for you. But let's use the first clip. Here we go. I was already about to quickly pull my hand thinking about the Garance clips. But this is definitely not it. Okay, we are ready. Fire. We choose our target. And with the final shot, the plate falls. The first impressions are very positive, I'll tell you, as far as shooting is concerned. That is, the recoil is very light. It has a really pleasant recoil, really light. It's a heavy weapon. The ammunition is the 6.5 Carcano, and on the side of the ammunition a bit weaker, we could say, for this type of caliber. You can really feel the sponginess of the bolt when you work it. It's very spongy, it's not very fluid. Especially because it gives the impression that you're struggling with this clip, which can move slightly, so you have an element that flexes, making it spongy, relatively spongy, but in a different way. The Mosin is hard to use. This one instead seems like there's something holding it back. It's not very hard, but it's almost braked. Let's move from the camera. Let's see from another angle how it goes again. Clip inside the weapon. You have to be careful to put it in the right position and struggle a little against it. Let's try. I will tell you that the sights I quite like. Or rather, these almost protective wings, these wings where there are the various measurements of the instance. Absurdly, they make you acquire the aim very quickly, and then the 5 of the aim attack is quite easy. Among other things, this is a particular model because it's a symbol, a mark on the barrel, which means that this is a particularly accurate barrel. Honestly, with these sights, you can make nice shots. The weapon is definitely, absolutely mechanically capable of doing it. Okay. The action of the Carcano, although at times it feels spongy, works quite well. It's not the pinnacle of technology, it's not the P14 we saw on the channel, but it works, and it works better than weapons. I like to make this comparison like the Mosin. Visibly, there is a big difference with the last shot that is loaded. You can really feel the greater friction that the bolt makes in the last shot. I don't know how much this can be an advantage. There are those who say that you can feel that this is the last shot, but in battle, trust me that people don't particularly realize it. For the rest, the Carcano is much better than one might think. It's certainly not the top of the range of bolt actions and will quickly, let's say, be beaten by second generation tablet actions, but among the first generation ones, it's perhaps one of the best. However, I want to mention a malfunction we actually had after the end of the shooting when we were using the rest of the ammunition recreationally. My good assistant Matteo Mancino caused a malfunction that I've actually seen happen to the famous Ian from Forgotten Weapons during a race with a Carcano. He's also left-handed. But is there a chance to accidentally rotate the firing pin out of its seat? What if we rotate the firing pin out of its seat? The bolt does not want to close. Thank you all for watching this video. Remember, as always, that these videos are made possible by people like you. You who, first of all, give me access to your weapons to be able to try them, to be able to bring them to the channel. I thank very much, obviously, the Polygon here of Brony and Red Barrett, and I thank you who support me with the views, the likes, the comments, or on platforms like TP and Patron. Such activities are costly, not free. I hope you enjoyed this story about this iconic rifle for Italy. We, as always, will see you next time.